The effective tax rate, it was way off.
So what's the plan?
We're bringing in BDO. The partner's already on it.
People who know BDO.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to On the Money. I'm Maria Bartiromo. The market smashed through all-time highs again. What's behind this powerful rally? And should you invest? Is it too late to get in? Then my conversation with the man who was in charge of the most powerful government office you've never heard of. Why he says smart regulation from fuel efficiency to food safety makes life a lot better. And then sunshine on the high seas. Cruising has been getting a bad rap lately, but does that make it the perfect time to hunt for bargains on the high seas? On the Money begins right now.
This is America's #1 financial news program, On the Money. Now, Maria Bartiromo.
Here's a look at what's making news as we head into a new week on the money. Another day, another record. The stock market soared to fresh all-time highs this past week, with both the Dow and the S&P 500 reaching uncharted territory yet again. We're closer to Dow 15,000 than ever. By Thursday, the Dow and the S&P were riding a 4-day winning streak, and nearly 30% of the stocks in the S&P 500 had hit new highs. The Nasdaq also hit a fresh 12-year high, partly due to an upbeat report on initial jobless claims, and money flew into stock funds from cash. The market's winning streak was broken, though, on Friday. The Federal Reserve released minutes from the last open market committee meeting this week, and by mistake, they were emailed a day early to more than 100 people. So far, it looks like there is no evidence of illegal trading as a result, though the SEC is investigating. The minutes themselves, well, it did open up a new debate on whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to start tapering down that $85 billion worth of bond purchases every month as early as this summer. President Obama released his long-awaited budget this week. It totals $3.77 trillion, with spending up 6% from 2013 and a projected deficit of $744 billion. It includes changes to the way entitlements such as Social Security benefits are calculated and has tax increases in it as well. Earnings season is underway again. Two key banks, JPMorgan Chase and Wells Fargo, beat analysts' expectations, as did aluminum giant Alcoa. Some debate, though, about the quality of earnings. Well, it seems like every time you turn around, the market is hitting new highs. So how long will it last, and where do stocks go next? It's not the only big question of the week, of course. What is the impact of President Obama's new budget proposal? Joining me now to talk about all of that, Sean Matthews, the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, and David Walker is Comeback America founder and CEO. Gentlemen, great to see you. Thank you so much for being with me today. So, Sean, let me kick it off with you. The markets, pretty hot stuff. Dow, S&P 500 hitting all-time highs again this week. Just keeps wanting to go higher. What do you think's behind it?
I think from a relative value basis, equities are cheap. And you look at it, you have a fixed income complex where 10-year treasuries are trading below 2%. And money has to find returns at this point in time. So certainly everyone is looking at it from the standpoint of equities on a relative value basis are cheap, and they're going to continue to put their money there. Now, we may get a cyclical nature in how the money is going to go in and out of the equity market, but in general, people want to put their money in equity.
But we all know that largely this is being fueled by the Federal Reserve, right? Because there just are no alternatives to stocks when people are looking for yield. So it doesn't matter that the economy is just so-so?
Well, you have balance sheets at corporations in great shape. You have revenue growth that's so-so, and I agree with that. But in reality, where else do you put your money? So people are looking at probably a wave of M&A activity is going to come into the marketplace over the next year or so as people look to grow their revenue in alternative sources with really cheap money financing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I want to ask you about real estate in a minute. But David, how do you see things? I mean, here we've got the Federal Reserve really fueling this rally. Do you think the economy gets better this year?
Well, I think we're going to get slow growth. We still have an unemployment problem. The Federal Reserve obviously said that they may end up not doing as much stimulus by the end of this year.
Which was another headline this week.
Which is a headline, which is affecting gold prices, among other things, if you will. And, you know, as was mentioned, everything in the world is relative. Relative with regard to, you know, investment opportunities, with regard to asset classes, relative with regard to the financial condition of the country as compared to other sovereign nations, et cetera.
Yeah, let me ask you about this sovereign nation. America's long-term debt and deficit is something you've been working on for a long time. Do you think President Obama's budget proposal starts to address it? What is your take on what we heard this week from the president?
I think the president's budget proposal was an attempt to try to put everything on the table and to bridge the House Republican budget and the Senate Democratic budget. I don't think we're going to have a reconciliation of the budget this year. We're going to have a continuing resolution. I think sequester is with us unless and until there's a bigger grand bargain. The real question is, what is the president going to do now? How is he going to get a grand bargain? And I think the only way you're going to get one is if you go directly to the people in a governing style rather than a campaign divisive style.
Is he up for that job?
I don't know. We'll find out
yeah.
within the next 60 days. I think the next 60 days will tell us whether we're just going to muddle through or whether we're actually going to make some meaningful progress by the end of the summer.
And yet, Sean, these issues, the fact that we are spending more than we take in year after year, it's not impacting the markets at all. Do you still see the kind of conviction for stocks that you've been seeing since October?
I think it's starting to slow down a little bit. I mean, it feels like a little bit of a blow-off phase here at the end. Every day it seems like it's going up 50 to 100 points. So I think we're going to that old adage, sell in May and go away. I think you'll start to see probably the market tail off a little bit here, a slight pullback. But in general, everyone is still looking to put their money to work on pullbacks.
You know, Sam Zell, who of course has been really a brilliant real estate investor, selling at the top back in 2007, he told me this week that he wants to compare the stock market of today to where the housing market was back in 2006. So I want to get your take on what he said to me this week. Here's Sam Zell.
Every single day it goes up. Every day in 2006, the housing market went up. What was the number one headline every day? Housing prices going up. What are you talking about every day now? New high on the stock market every day. I just think that we are suffering through another irrational exuberance.
Is that how you see it, irrational exuberance?
Until you have a definitive change in the way the central banks are putting liquidity into the world economies, I would disagree with that. So if you look at what's going on right now, you have money looking for assets. And real estate's actually doing so well in this scenario. Money has to find a home. It's going into equities.
Do you think if we were to get a plan in Washington to actually, you know, begin to fix the Medicare and Medicaid problem, the fact that these programs are running out of money and could go bankrupt, do you think that would create confidence? Just knowing that there's a plan in place?
Yes, I think if we had a plan that was phased in over time, focused on getting debt as a percentage of the economy down to a reasonable level, phasing in changes to Social Security and Medicare, doing comprehensive tax reform that provides more certainty, stability, while generating more revenue, yeah, I do think it would make a big difference, and that's what we need to be focusing on.
So the left is mad because there's too much cutting in the proposal in terms of Social Security and Medicare, and the right is mad, basically saying we're not getting a plan to actually change these programs. And once again, it falls on the highest earners, more taxes from them.
The left is getting mad because the president put Social Security and Medicare on the table in a very modest way. They are out of touch with reality. These programs have serious challenges, especially Medicare. The right is upset because there's more revenues. Newsflash, we're going to have more revenues, but we need to have it as part of comprehensive tax reform, and it needs to be coupled with social insurance reforms.
What are you advising clients to do right now?
I think people still have to look for, you know, putting money to work in the equity market at this point in time.
Because of the lack of yield anywhere else. Gentlemen,
Absolutely.
Great conversation. We so appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David Walker and Sean Matthews. Christine Lagarde, meanwhile, had a surprising warning about the state of Europe's economy, and she mentioned two countries that she says could pose real risk to the global economy. I spoke to the managing director of the IMF this week about the global economy, the Fed, and the world recovery. All part of this week's conversation.
You have one group of countries, essentially the emerging market economies and the developing countries, that are going quite well. Then you have the second group, the second speed recovery, if you will, countries that are on the mend. And I would include in that group the United States of America. Then you have the third group, the third speed recovery, where countries still have a lot to do. And in that category, you find the Eurozone in particular and Japan.
Today, we're hearing all different commentary about when the Federal Reserve should ease back on its stimulus. Do you think there are damages to this plan longer term?
First of all, I would observe that the Fed has indicated that they would do so with two compasses, if you will. One, inflation, and they're keeping a very attentive eye to inflation. And second, employment. What we see at the moment is inflation under control. As long as that is the case, and given that the fiscal tool is not available, at the moment, then the monetary policy should continue as it does.
In your speech, you said Italy and France may pose grave risks to the Eurozone.
Well, these two countries are very large players in the Eurozone, and they have undertaken some structural reforms, both of them. They are dealing with a degree of fiscal consolidation, but in our view, in terms of structural reforms, more needs to be done.
My thanks to Christine Lagarde. Up next on The Money and playing by the rules, what do car emissions, healthcare, and financial reform have in common? They all pass through the office of my next guest, the former regulatory czar for the Obama administration. Cass Sunstein is with me. He says rules can make government simpler. And later, are travelers abandoning cruise ships? That is, we find out how the travel season is shaping up for these floating hotels. As we take a break, take a look at how the stock market ended the week. Do smart rules make for better government? My next guest led a unit of the White House Office of Management and Budget that reviews every regulation proposed by the executive branch. The Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, what he calls the cockpit of the regulatory state. Cass Sunstein is with me, currently professor at Harvard Law School and author of Simpler, the Future of Government. Cass, good to have you on the program.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So as head of OIRA, no significant rule could be issued by any cabinet department without going through you. That means fuel efficiency standards, changes to the food pyramid. Tell me about that role.
Okay, so this was an idea that President Reagan actually had in the early 80s. The idea is that rules are often very expensive. They sometimes can protect public health and welfare, safety, the environment. They sometimes can hurt the economy. They can hurt businesses large and small. And the Reagan idea, which President Obama has embraced, there should be an office that carefully scrutinizes the rules to make sure that they're basically consistent with law and sensible.
Now, business today is always talking about what's on the horizon in the regulatory environment, and in the book, you write that the Obama administration approved fewer new regulations in the first term than the Bush White House. But the new regulations since 2009 make some fairly significant changes, right? So even though there may be fewer of them, are they even more far-reaching?
Well, I think the best measure of reach, if we're talking in business terms, is cost. And the most costly year for regulation in the last 10 was 2007.
And that was because of TARP, right?
It was because of air pollution rules.
Oh, wow.
So if you look at the Bush administration regulatory record, not only were there more than Obama, but the highest cost year was higher than any year under the Obama administration.
So let me ask you about the health care reform. What role did your office take in reviewing the rules for the Affordable Care Act?
Well, my office had, as it standardly does, a rule in overseeing those rules so that they're issued only once they've passed through the scrutiny my office provides. And I was one of a team of people within the White House and the other parts of the executive branch that tried to work hard to make the rules that were issued were legal and sensible.
Okay. And what do you say to those who say, look, this is the reason companies are sitting on cash? I mean, there's something like $3.6 trillion on balance sheets right now from corporate America. They say, we're sitting on the money. We're not going to use it to create jobs and hire people because too many rules like healthcare reform impacts the efficiency of my business, and this is strangling growth.
Well, there's a question of how to make the rules as good as possible, and if there are rules that are coming that people are nervous about, to work with the federal government to make them less a source of nervousness is extremely important, and that's ongoing. I don't think the economists believe that regulatory fear is the principal cause of the principal source of economic difficulty now, but it is correct to say that to keep the costs under control and to ensure simplicity and clarity is a primary imperative for the next years.
What's your take on Dodd-Frank? I guess, the banks are reporting earnings right now, and I thought it was really interesting. All the analyst reports that I'm looking at have far less to do with earnings and far more to do with the regulatory environment. Do you expect that we are going to see spin-offs from businesses? The big banks, they've got to, spin off their investment banking business because Dodd-Frank financial reform, do you think?
I don't think so.
You're not expecting that?
I'm not expecting that. The future is hard to predict, but we have to keep in mind the impetus for Dodd-Frank, which is we had a terrible financial crisis from which we're still trying to recover. And the principal goal of Dodd-Frank is to make sure that we reduce systemic risk.
Some of the hundreds of rules have not been implemented yet. Why is that? Why is this particular legislation taking long to actually take effect?
There are a few different challenges. One is there are a lot of agencies involved in issuing some of the rules, and they have to coordinate with one another, and that's an important goal. Another is that to do careful analysis of costs and benefits is something that some of the agencies have been focused on, and some courts have been focused on. That takes some time too. And a third point, which is kind of the good side of delay, which does have some bad sides, is that people in government are paying a lot of attention to public comments. So if there's a rule proposed and the private sector, not only businesses but public interest groups, come in and say, look, what you propose doesn't make a lot of sense, it has some big problems with it, here's how to fix them, then those comments need to be carefully attended to.
Do you think too big to fail goes away?
Well, I think one thing that should go away is the risk, the failure of one bank or one economic actor will have proliferating, cascading effects through the system. And the primary impetus behind a lot of the Dodd-Frank legislation is to ensure against those cascading effects.
Good to have you on the program, Cass.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Best of luck on the book. Cass Sunstein joining us. Up next on The Money, cruise horror stories continue to pop up. Can the industry recover from the bad press? And does that mean you can get a bargain on your next vacation? Do you even want one? Take a look at us on Facebook/Maria Bartiromo. Back in a moment. A true nightmare on the high seas. An engine room fire on the Carnival Triumph resulted in more than 3,000 passengers stranded for days in the Gulf of Mexico 2 months ago. And yet this isn't the only cruise horror story we've seen this year. With the summer travel season here and people too scared to take vacations on the high seas, can you find bargains if you look hard enough? Joining me now is Travel and Leisure's international editor, Mark Orwell. Mark, it's good to have you on the program.
Thanks, Maria.
As always, thank you so much. So what's your sense of how travelers are feeling about taking a cruise right now after all of these horror stories? Are they less likely to go on a cruise after the Triumph?
Well, a lot of people are afraid about the safety issues on cruising in general right now. There was a recent Harris poll that measures trust in various industries. In this case, they did one on a poll on the cruise industry, said that the trust level among the American public has dropped by 17% in the weeks following the Triumph disaster. But you have, on the other hand, passengers, people who have traveled on a cruise once, twice, or many, many times, and they look at this more as a one-off.
Yeah, so have these events impacted the industry? I mean, are sales down?
Well, the actual number of sales for Carnival, Mickey Arison, the CEO of Carnival, the parent corporation, said that they were down in the double digits, but that they rebounded quickly after that. Generally speaking, travel agents are saying that, no, cruise sales, the number of people buying cruises hasn't really dropped.
You know, I don't know if I want to stick my neck out and say, hey, you know, maybe I'll go on a cruise because it's bargain. But, you know, Carnival has a lot of deals right now.
Oh, my gosh.
We actually found a cruise to the Bahamas. Sounds pretty good in the rainy weather today. We found a cruise to the Bahamas costing $46 a night for 5 nights.
I know.
Are these deals too good to be true?
Yeah, some wag on the internet said that, yeah, it's cheaper than a Motel 6 stay. But in fact, if you add in the fees and you add in the port taxes, it comes out to more like $75 a day. Nonetheless,
not bad.
They are, I mean, Carnival is discounting like crazy. Their average prices have dropped by about 8.9% since the Triumph situation. The cruise industry in general, prices are down. Not, you know, they've decreased about 2.1%. But some cruise lines are actually raising their prices right now. NCL, Royal Caribbean, they've raised their prices about 7%.
UK. So they're trying to gain on their competitors' upset.
I think that's exactly what's happening, yeah.
So what's happening next? Have there been cries for more regulation and oversight of this industry? Well, can this industry have oversight?
There is. The government actually does regulate the cruise industry to a great extent. That is, every cruise ship that comes into our ports in the U.S., they are inspected for health and safety issues by the U.S. Coast Guard. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York is proposing a cruise passenger Bill of Rights, which would allow people to get a full refund and get off of a ship if it's disabled. Senator Jay Rockefeller of West Virginia has actually sent a letter to Carnival suggesting that they may want to repay the federal government for the Navy and Coast Guard's efforts to bring the disabled Triumph back to port. Carnival says, I don't think so.
Yeah, I can see that. Good to have you on the program.
Thanks,
Mark.
Maria.
Thank you so much for joining us. Up next, a look at the news this upcoming week that will have an impact on your money. And then talk about state of the art, $1 billion of it, all being given away. Picture that. For more on our show and our guests, check out the website, otm.cnbc.com. And I hope you'll follow me on Twitter and on Google+. Look for @Maria_Bartiromo. First, though, here's a look at the stories coming up in the week ahead that may move the markets and impact your money this week. More earnings news. We will hear from a slew of banks, including Citigroup, Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, American Express, and Morgan Stanley. The group may very well set the tone for trading. Other companies on deck, Coca-Cola, Google, Johnson & Johnson, Intel, Verizon, and eBay with their first quarter earnings. Meanwhile, tax day is upon us. Monday is the deadline for millions of Americans to file their income taxes for 2012. Tuesday, March's Consumer Price Index report will be out. The CPI tracks the price change for household goods and services. On Wednesday, Britain will hold a state funeral for former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. And finally today, hang this on the wall. Leonard Lauder, son of cosmetics founder Estee Lauder, gave a gift reportedly worth $1 billion to New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art this week. His collection of 78 works of art, including 33 by Picasso, from the early 20th century Cubist period, is one of the largest philanthropic donations in history. It will also significantly impact the Met's standing as the foremost chronicler of modern art. The museum will launch a special exhibition from Lauder's donation in 2014. That'll do it for us for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Next week, what's the headline about the future of the news business? How digital consumers could stop the presses. Each week, keep it right here where we are on the money. Have a great week, everybody. I'll see you again next weekend.
Ross needs an auditor who knows the industry as well as he does. For Brian, it's whether he can call the partner at midnight.
So?
They both came up with the same name, BDO.
People who know BDO.